I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, not thinking about money at all, when someone a few rows back said they were ordering lunch. They didn't ask anyone directly. They just said it out loud like it was already happening. A couple people responded. Someone laughed. Someone asked where we were ordering from. And before I really processed it, my phone was already unlocked in my hand. I hadn't planned on buying lunch that day. I actually brought food. It was in the office fridge. Not exciting food, nothing Instagram worthy. Just something that would have done the job. But there was this tiny moment where it felt easier to spend $13 than to explain why I wasn't joining in. Not because anyone demanded it. Nobody pressured me. Nobody would have cared, honestly. But my brain filled in that silence anyway. That's the part that's been bothering me lately. How some spending decisions don't come from wanting something. They come from wanting the moment to stay smooth. No friction, no pause, no weird energy, just keep things moving. I told myself it was nothing. $13. That's not real money, right? That's a coffee and a sandwich. That's not a financial decision. That's just a day happening. Except I've noticed how often those not real money moments show up. And how rarely they feel like choices while they're happening. There's something strange that happens when money turns social. It stops feeling like money. It starts feeling like mood management. Like paying a small fee to stay in rhythm with everyone else. And I used to think that made me easygoing, flexible, low maintenance. The kind of person who doesn't make things awkward. What I didn't notice at the time was how often my wallet was doing emotional labor for me. Office lunches are where I really learned this pattern, even though it took me years to realize it. Not the occasional lunch out, I mean the regular ones. The kind nobody officially agrees to, but somehow become the default. There's always a reason. Someone didn't have time to pack food. Someone's had a rough morning. Someone's celebrating something small. And because it's framed as casual, it never feels like a decision. You can technically opt out. Nobody stops you. But opting out feels like stepping slightly to the side of the group. Not enough to cause drama, just enough to feel it. I remember telling myself it was once a week, maybe twice, which sounded reasonable. $20-something here, $30 there. But when I finally added it up, it was closer to 8 lunches a month, sometimes more. Let's say $25 each time. That's $200 a month, $2,400 a year, $2,400 just to avoid being the guy heating up leftovers. And the weird thing is I didn't feel angry at anyone. I didn't feel taken advantage of. I just felt quietly annoyed at my bank balance, like it was underperforming for no clear reason. Nothing big had gone wrong. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't irresponsible. I just kept paying small tolls all day long, and most of them were social. What makes this hard to notice is how normal it feels. Nobody's being extravagant. Nobody's throwing money around. It all looks reasonable from the outside. And that's kind of the trap. When spending is socially justified, it doesn't trigger that internal alarm. It doesn't feel like a splurge. It feels like participation. I told myself this was just part of being an adult, part of working life. And maybe it is. But I didn't realize how much of my money was being spent just to maintain a sense of normal. I started noticing the same thing with friends, not new friends, old ones. The kind you've known long enough that nobody explains anything anymore. Things just shift. Someone gets a promotion, someone moves in with a partner, someone's parents help with a down payment, and that part never really comes up. The plans change quietly. Restaurants get nicer, trips get longer. Splitting everything evenly stays the rule, even when the math stops lining up the same way. And I remember telling myself I was almost there too, that my finances were just temporarily behind the group, like this was a preview of the life I was about to catch up to. That belief carried me longer than it should have. Long enough to say yes to weekends I couldn't really afford. Long enough to agree to dinners I pretended didn't matter. It didn't feel like pressure. That's what's tricky. It felt like encouragement, like being invited into a better version of myself. And I didn't want to be the guy who slowed things down. So I kept up, or tried to. What I didn't notice was how much energy it took to pretend it wasn't a stretch, how expensive hope can be when it's doing all the financial work. There's this thing that happens in groups where nobody ever suggests the cheapest option. Not because they're against it. It just doesn't occur to anyone. Someone says, let's go here now, and it's slightly nicer than last time. Someone else says sure, and suddenly that's the new baseline. No discussion, no decision, just drift. And I realized later how rarely I would have chosen those places on my own. Alone, I'm pretty basic, but in a group, my standards mysteriously upgrade. I let the room decide for me. It felt easier that way. There's relief in not deciding. And there's a cost to that relief that doesn't show up right away. Family works differently, but not really. The expectations just wear nicer clothes. Holidays, birthdays, weddings. There's always an unspoken price tag attached to showing up the right way. Gifts that match the occasion. Travel that proves you care. Nobody sends you a bill, but everyone notices. I grew up learning that spending money was part of being present, so when I didn't have much, I stretched. I told myself it was temporary, that love was worth it, and it is. But there's a strange guilt that comes from spending beyond your comfort for people you love. And a different kind of guilt when you can't. Family money pressure doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like tradition. And traditions are expensive when you never ask where they came from. Work adds another layer. There's this financial culture that forms without anyone agreeing to it. Coffee every morning. Lunch out because we deserve it. Subscriptions everyone uses, so you feel like you need them too. And nobody knows what anyone else makes. So you just assume it's fine. If they can afford it, I must be able to as well. That assumption cost me more than I realized. I remember feeling slightly proud that I never complained about money at work. Like that made me mature, reliable. But what I was really doing was absorbing costs silently and calling it adulthood. Work already takes enough from you. It didn't need to take money too. But it did because I let the environment decide what normal looked like. And somewhere in all of this, money stopped feeling like something I chose. It started feeling like something that happened to me through other people. That's when it finally got uncomfortable enough to notice. There was a point where it stopped feeling abstract and started feeling physical. Not panic, not a breakdown. Just that low-grade tightness you get in your chest when you open your banking app and nothing looks wrong, but nothing looks right either. The numbers weren't shocking. That was the problem. Rent made sense. Bills were fine. No giant impulse buys, no disaster. And yet somehow money always felt like it was slipping just slightly faster than I expected. Like I was walking on one of those moving sidewalks at the airport, but in the wrong direction. That's when I started noticing how rarely social spending comes alone. You don't just pay for the dinner. You pay for the Uber there. You pay for the extra drink because you're already out. You pay for the tip. Then the next morning, you pay again because you're tired and grab something instead of making breakfast. One plan quietly triggers 4 or 5 smaller ones, all justified by momentum. I used to treat each charge like it was unrelated, just a bad week, just timing. But when you zoom out even a little, it's clearly a chain. And chains are expensive. I remember one month where I went out with friends maybe 4 times. That didn't sound like much. Once a week, normal. Each night was maybe $70 or $80 when everything was done. Drinks, food, ride home. Nothing crazy. Let's say $80 4 times. That's $320 in 1 month. Almost $4,000 a year. $4,000 just for evenings that all kind of blur together now. When I finally said that number out loud, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt uncomfortable. Like admitting something I already knew but had been avoiding. This was the part I didn't want to look at first. Not because it was complicated. Because it was obvious. And social media made all of this louder. I didn't notice it at the time, but scrolling was planting ideas that cost money days later. Someone posts a trip. Suddenly a weekend away feels overdue. Someone posts a dinner. Suddenly cooking at home feels like you're falling behind. It's never direct. Nobody says, go spend. It just sits there, quietly adjusting your sense of what's normal. I used to call that inspiration, but inspiration is free. This wasn't. What made it worse was how automatic my yes became. Invitations accepted before I checked anything. Messages replied to on autopilot. I was tired. That mattered more than I realized. Tired versions of me made cheerful commitments. More alert versions of me paid for them later. Pausing felt like effort. Thinking felt heavy. Spending felt easier. Saying no always felt bigger than it should have. Even when it was reasonable. Even when it made sense. Declining an invite felt like making a statement. Even when it wasn't. So I chose financial discomfort instead of social discomfort. Which sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but felt logical in the moment. Over time, my own limits started to blur. Budgets softened around other people. Boundaries became flexible. I told myself I was being generous, easy, understanding. But there's a point where flexibility turns into disappearing, and I crossed that line more than once without realizing it. The resentment didn't show up as anger. That would have been easier to spot. It showed up as tension, as irritability, as money feeling heavier than it should have. I never blamed anyone else. I just felt off. And that made it harder to fix because there was no obvious problem to point to. I wasn't mad at my friends. I wasn't mad at my family. I wasn't even really mad at myself. I was just tired of feeling like money kept leaking through situations I didn't consciously choose. Eventually, there was this quiet moment. No drama, no spreadsheet. Just me late at night, looking at a few upcoming plans on my phone, and instead of feeling excited, I felt that familiar weight. That pause before responding. That internal calculation I used to ignore. It didn't feel like clarity. It felt like responsibility. And here's the thing that took me a while to accept. Most of the pressure was accidental. Nobody was trying to drain my bank account. Nobody was forcing anything. Other people weren't the villains in the story. They were just living their lives at their speed, with their circumstances. I played my part. I just didn't realize how often I let other people's normal become my obligation. I still catch myself doing it. Saying yes too fast. Spending to smooth things over. Awareness didn't fix everything. It just made the moments louder, more noticeable, harder to ignore. Some nights I still sit there with my phone in my hand, thinking about plans, about money, about how small decisions pile up. There's usually a number floating through my head. Not huge, not dramatic, just heavy enough to feel. And I don't always make the right call. Sometimes I still spend it. Sometimes I still go. But now I notice the moment. That's different. I don't really have a clean ending for this. Just that image. Me, late at night, phone glowing. A message waiting. That small pause before I answer. And that quiet awareness that other people will always shape how money moves through my life. Whether I like it or not, I just try to sit with that pause a little longer than I used to.